Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 1. My name is John Page. I'm from Dymocks. And our very special guest today is best-selling author David Baldacci, who is joining us from the United States. David's latest book is Daylight, which is the third book in the Atlee Pine series. David, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here, even virtually. So I'm looking forward to this event tonight. Thank you.
So let's start off with talking about your new book. Tell us a little bit about Daylight and where we're up to in the Atlee Pine series.
So this is the third installment in the Atlee Pine series. The first one was Long Road to Mercy. The second one was A Minute to Midnight. And in this one, Pine and her associate Carol Blum go to Trenton, New Jersey, where they think they have a lead on a guy who's the grandson of the man, Ito Vincenzo, who kidnapped Mercy Pine 30 years ago in Georgia. And she goes to his house to track him down. She wants to talk to him. She doesn't have any idea who the guy is. She just wants to talk to him. He's obviously a young guy. And in the first chapter, she runs headlong into another one of my series characters, John Puller, who's an Army investigator. And he's there to arrest Vincenzo because he thinks he's running a drug operation out of Fort Dix, New Jersey, which is a military installation. So the arrest gets all messed up, and Puller and Pine decide to work together. She'll help him with his investigation, and he'll help her trying to find her sister. So really, readers get two bangs for the buck. They get two serious characters in one book.
Fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about Atlee Pine as well, and what makes you so excited about this new series that you're currently writing.
Yeah, she's my first female lead protagonist. I've written a lot of female characters in a lot of my books, obviously, but she's special. She's an FBI agent, and I started thinking about writing a character like that when I went to an organization called WIFL, and I wrote about WIFL in a book, and WIFL stands for Women in Federal Law Enforcement. It's a real organization, and the head of it called me up after the book came out and said, "My God, you're the only author who has ever mentioned us in a book. Would you love to be our keynote speaker at our national convention?" So I went to the national convention. I'm in a ballroom with like 800 women. All of them have guns. I've never been this intimidated in my life. And I spoke, but I also talked to a lot of the women there. And sort of the one refrain I got was that, women, it's still very much a male-dominated arena, those federal law enforcement. And they have to work 2 and 3 times as hard to get to the same level as men. And that already stuck in my mind. So when I was thinking about creating a new series, I thought, this is sort of a tip of the hat, a homage to the female law enforcement people, female agents out there. I'm going to create a female character that's going to be pretty darn kick-ass, and she's going to walk into a room like guys do in thrillers all the time and sort of dominate. She's going to walk in and dominate. A girl is going to walk in and dominate, and people are going to go look at her and go, "I don't want to mess with her. She looks like a force of nature." And then I wanted to give her sort of an emotional backstory, because when you think about creating a series, you have to have enough material there to justify multiple books. And for her, it was all about her twin sister, Mercy Pine, who was kidnapped 30 years ago when they were very young. And that has been a hole in Atlee Pine's heart for her entire life. It destroyed her family. Her parents got divorced. Her parents disappeared. It's only Atlee left. And now her personal side, not having closure with her sister's disappearance, has started to impact her professional life, such that she screwed up at the FBI. She almost killed a guy who was in her custody because she was so distraught about her sister's disappearance. And the FBI gave her an ultimatum. They said, "Look, you're a great agent, but you got to fix this. You got to go figure out what happened to your sister. And when you do, come back. And if you don't figure it out, then don't come back. You don't have a career at the FBI. You have no future left." So, and the FBI really is her whole life. So her ultimatum is she has got to figure this out. And I promised in the first book by the title, it is a long road to mercy. And I meant that. So in Daylight, you find out a lot about what happened to Mercy. And you also find out that most of Pine's past, what she things she took for granted to be true, is a total fabrication. Most of her life has been a lie, and that really rocked her to her core. So this book is full of revelation after revelation after revelation, and it sets up the next book, which I'm working on right now, which will be the full disclosure, full closure on what happened to Mercy Pine.
Fantastic. So you mentioned as well as a crossover with this new one with another character of yours. Most crime writers have 1 or 2 series, but you have multiple series going. How do you juggle them all, and what makes you decide to go in which direction when you go to write the next book?
It's kind of like having a big family. You got a lot of kids. They're sitting around the table at Thanksgiving. Everybody's asking, "So when is it my turn? When is it my turn?" I almost feel like I have the Justice League of Heroes. They're all cupping around saying, "Look," grabbing me by the collar and saying, "I'm next. Let's do it." It's really, I think I have a lot of series going because you get to the point where you've written 5 or 6 books, and it's like, well, I've said all I needed to say about this particular series, and so I want to move on to something else. I got some great advice from a wonderful writer years ago. His name was William Goldman. He was a screenwriter. He won 2 Academy Awards. He wrote All the President's Men, The Princess Bride, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Marathon Man, just tons of stuff. He was a screenwriter for Absolute Power, my very first novel that was turned into a film with Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman. And we spent a lot of time together working on the script and going to locations for the film. And he said, look, if you want to have a long career as a writer, and I was just starting out, he said, the one thing you never want to be as a writer is comfortable. Once you get comfortable as a writer, you've lost it. You should go off and do something else for a living. Because once you're comfortable, you lose the edge. So for me, when I start a new series, I have to start from scratch. It's like I'm writing my first novel again. And I've got to recreate and create a brand new world, brand new characters, a whole peripheral set of ensemble cast. And I get out of my comfort zone. All my series characters are very different. And that keeps me on edge. That keeps me sort of like knife-like. Like I don't know what I'm doing. But because of that, your focus is a lot more intense. And so for me, sometimes when I choose a character to put into a plot, sometimes it's as pragmatic as when I'm establishing a character, I don't want to wait years in between a book because the readers can lose that connectivity. So if I'm establishing a new character like an Atlee Pine or an Amos Decker, I really like to have a book a year. So I know that, okay, I'm going to do at least one book a year, either the spring or fall, with those characters while they get established. And sometimes it's as simple as I got a great idea for these guys or this character. And so I pull them out and I put them into a plot that I think really meshes well with who they are as a character, and it's true to them. So sometimes it's just very pragmatic, sometimes just spontaneous. So it's like, I miss this guy, I miss this person, I want to bring them back.
Excellent. So you mentioned that they were like a family sitting around the table. Do you have a favorite character, and are you allowed to say which one's your favorite?
When my kids were growing up, depending on the day, I could easily tell you which was my favorite and which was not my favorite. With characters, it's a little difficult. My sort of pat answer is whatever character I'm currently working on is my favorite character, just because I'm kind of fresh with that person. But I think, I love Atlee Pine. Amos Decker kind of sticks with me because he's so different from any other character I've created. He's a polar opposite of like the hero character. He's kind of like an anti-hero in many ways. But I started running a crime noir series about a year and a half ago with a guy named Aloysius Archer in One Good Deed. And it's set in 1949, a time period that I love. I'm a big Raymond Chandler fan and Ross McDonald, and that time period was so atmospheric. And there's something about Archer, that I kind of like. He, back in 1949, he was sort of my dad's age back then. My dad fought in World War II and he came back, and so did Archer, and he wants to start a new life. The whole country wanted to start a new life because the war had lasted a long time and had been very disruptive. So it's really hard. I would Archer, Atlee, Amos. It's like the A-team, right? So those are my three favorites right now anyway.
Excellent. So you were a lawyer before becoming a full-time writer. What drove you to become an author of crime novels, and how difficult was it to balance both careers before you switched to being full-time?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I was one of those kids that never shut up. And so my mom gave me a journal and said, a lot of the stuff you've been talking about, why don't you try writing it down? You love to read, you love books. Why don't you write some of your own stories? And I did. And years later, I found out she just did it to shut me up because I never gave her a peace and quiet. And unfortunately, poor mom. But when my pen hit the paper, it was kind of like, oh my God, it was like this epiphany. I can create something that other people can read. Just like the books that I love to read. So I spent years of my life writing short stories because I was a huge short story fan. Alice Munro, Margaret Atwood, Eudora Welty, Flannery O'Connor. And I tried to get published when I was in high school and when I was in college, and had almost no success at all because nobody wanted to publish anything of mine. And then I started writing screenplays and teleplays when I was in law school and then practicing law. And I got an agent in Hollywood based on some of my screenplays. Had a couple of options. And then I had an idea for a novel about the president being a bad guy and doing something really terrible. And there was a cover up, and eventually the truth came out. And that was the plot for Absolute Power. And I spent 3 years writing that. And I won't say it was easy. I was a trial lawyer, so I worked incredibly long hours. Whatever you say about lawyers, whether you like them or not, they work long hours because all I had to sell was 1 hour increments of my life. And that's how I made my living, billing clients that way. So it was a juggle, and I had to pick my time. I usually wrote from 10 at night until 2 in the morning. I did that, 6, 7 nights a week for years and years and years. And I know that sounds draconian, but you ask any writer, how did they start out? I got up at the crack of dawn, or I didn't get any sleep for 12 years. And I just found my moment. I wrote at lunchtime. I wrote on the commute in. I wrote on the commute home. So if you really want to write, you do find the time to do that. And I think that being a lawyer, I would work on big cases for years at a time. So writing a book for years at a time was not daunting to me. My whole life was about detail and facts and research. And as a lawyer, I created a story. I had the same set of facts as the other side. And I had to build a story out of that that was diametrically opposed to what they were saying based on the same set of facts. So I had to argue and write persuasively. So the same attributes lawyers have, I use the same thing as a writer. I mean, as a lawyer, the only thing I had in my quiver were words, either spoken or written. So the crossover, when I actually made the crossover, and I continued practicing law for about a year after I sold Absolute Power, because I was married, I had one kid at the time, and I wanted to make sure this was going to work. And then finally, after talking with my wife, I said, I really think I can make a career out of this. I have a lot of ideas, a lot of energy, and we jointly made the decision. And I said, look, if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to being a lawyer. In Washington, D.C., everybody needs lawyers. Fortunately, it worked out, and I never had to go back.
Fantastic. You mentioned Absolute Power being turned into a film, and that you also started off writing some screenplays. Hollywood seems to be in love with book adaptations at the moment. Is there any news about any of your books coming to the big or even the small screen?
Yeah, there are 2 right now that are in development. One is for the Amos Decker series, and the production company is Village Roadshow, and they're a very famous production company. They won a slew of Oscars for the feature film. They're getting into television now, so they have a writer attached, a producer attached, a director attached, and now they're actually shopping that around to both cable, network, and streamers. And I think streamers and cable really where the great stuff is happening right now. You can do so much more on those types of platforms. And I have another show that I created, not based on one of my books. It's a spy thriller that actually stars older woman, a female lead, who was a spy master decades ago and now is being brought back into the fold involuntarily. And that one is being developed for, television as well. So there's no guarantee. Look, I've been in the Hollywood business a long time, and you can have 99 people say yes, and you only need one person to say no to destroy the entire project. And that happens quite often out there. So I always tell them, look, don't bother me until the movie's ready to premiere or the series is ready to launch. And then I know that it's actually going to happen.
So your characters are also from kind of very different walks of life and all have different kind of jobs in their novels. What kind of research do you do for your books? And have you researched the psychology of criminals in order to understand them?
I do a lot of research for every book, and I like to be the person who does the research. I don't have an assistant to go out and do that. I've never thought about hiring somebody. I want to see it firsthand. I don't want to get it third hand from somebody else. Most of the places that I write about, I physically visit. I like walking around, looking at things, taking notes, taking pictures, talking to people who live there or work there. I have never been inspired by anything that I found on Wikipedia. It just doesn't rock my boat. But going to places can be incredibly inspiring. So I remember when I was first writing the John Puller series, my dad was in the Navy and all my uncles were in the armed forces. I'd never served in the military, but I wanted to get it right. And I have a lot of friends who are in the military. So I flew down to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is where the Army Rangers train. And I went down there and spent 3 days getting my ass kicked from one end of the base to the other. I was on the sniper range. I was jumping with parachutes. I was, doing the Army functional fitness training. I was jumping out of Humvees. I was doing all this stuff. But the other thing I did was that I talked to lots of people. I talked to everybody from privates on up to generals about why they had joined, what their perspective is, what were their motivations, how did they feel about it, what did they do, what did they like, what did they not like. And that type of research allows me to then build into the novel a level of authenticity that I think most readers can appreciate. That they read that and they're like, this guy knows the world that he's talking about. And because he knows the world that he's talking about, I really feel like I'm there in the moment. I feel like I'm right next to these people, and that is much more pleasurable read because I know when I read books by authors I like, I can tell within the first 10 pages where they've really done some good research or not. And if they have, it's just a much better read.
And what about the psychology of the criminals? Do you do any of that research or?
Oh, yes, I do. I've talked to lots of people across the spectrum. And getting into the heads, and that's the most fascinating thing with books of mine. People like the heroes and all that, but the people they really want to try to understand are the bad guys, the bad people on the other side, because we're all humans, and we wonder, how can somebody do that? How can somebody commit an act so heinous like that? I'm a human being, they're a human being. What's the difference between us? And 9 times out of 10, if it's a truly horrible crime, people always ask the question, how could they hurt somebody like that? How could they hurt a child and all that? And I totally get that question, because we're normal and we look at it from a different perspective. But if you're looking at someone who is a sociopath or a narcissist, you have to understand that their brains are not hardwired the same way that our brains are. They are missing crucial elements that actually allow you and I to be human and to have human perspective and to care about other people. Narcissist and sociopath do not care about other people. They are missing that part of the brain that even deals in that arena. So the reason they can harm other people is because when they harm other people, there's no emotional consequence for them to that. In fact, there's actually a jubilant sort of response to that. And you have to understand that when you're building a character, because I've had people, I don't always write about psychopath. I write about people who are also, troubled. They understand the consequences of their actions. And sometimes they feel deeply about it. They don't want to be doing this, but they feel like they're forced to do that. And sometimes I think those are the most interesting characters. The villains who are just crazy, you can make them interesting, but at the end of the day, I prefer to write people who have been sort of forced do something bad, because then we all wonder, the normal people, we wonder, oh my God, could I ever be pushed to the extent that I would ever do something like that? I wonder. When you have people wondering about that, and all of a sudden they are in the story all the way, and they're going to be there until the end.
You mentioned Raymond Chandler before. Who are some of your other favorite crime writers, and who's had the biggest influence on you as a writer?
I started out cutting my teeth on the likes of Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. And I love the puzzle components and the uniqueness of their characters, Jane Marple and Poirot and Sherlock Holmes, obviously. Growing up, I was influenced a lot by writers who don't really write in the thriller genre at all. John Irving was one of my favorite writers growing up in high school and college. For like 2 years, I tried to write like John Irving. And then I realized that I can't write like John Irving because I'm not John Irving. I have to find my own way. I was a big fan of Patricia Highsmith, not just Strangers on the Train, but the Ripley series as well. Just one of the most brilliant psychological writers of all time. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, so a writer when I growing up that I admired greatly, even though she's not much older than I am, but she hit the ground running and sooner than I did, is Patricia Cornwell. And her Kay Scarpetta series, some of the best thriller writing and best forensic writing out there. And I always look at Patsy's research and sort of hold that as the gold standard, because what she's really great is bringing a lot of detail into a novel, but she does it in such a way that it never interrupts the flow of the story, which is a really hard thing to do.
Writing is by nature a solitary practice. I'm interested whether COVID has changed your writing routine. Have you been able to get out and do as much location research that you like to do, or have you had to change things up a bit?
I think everybody has had to change things up a bit. I'm no exception to that. I haven't been traveling really at all, because I take seriously what healthcare professionals are telling you to do, and don't travel, wear a mask, social distance, and all those other things. So it's been more on, the great thing about YouTube is that you can go in any place on earth and take a video ride on YouTube. If you want to go down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon all the way back up on a mule, you can do it on YouTube. Funny enough, I've actually done that. And as far as production-wise, I remember last winter we were in Florida for the winter. We have a place down there, and I ended up doing something I'd never done before, because my spring tour was canceled and all my stuff was canceled. I wrote 2 books simultaneously, in over a 6-month period. One was Daylight. So I would work on Daylight for 2 weeks at a time. So I was in 2020, contemporary. And then for 2 weeks, I would jump in my time travel machine and I would scoot back to 1949, where I was writing the sequel to One Good Deed with Aloysius Archer, my crime noir Private Eye. And I went back and forth every 2 weeks for those 2 projects and finished them both about the same time. I've never done that before. And I don't know if because I just had an immense amount of time where I didn't have any demands to travel or do stuff. that I was totally able to focus on those books and finish them. And because of that, I'm ahead of schedule now, which is kind of nice to be. And I'm going to keep working hard because I don't want to fall behind schedule again. But that's what, if there's a silver lining in this terrible tragedy of COVID, I think that at least for me, and I'm incredibly fortunate, unlike a lot of people, I can work remotely. I don't have to go to a meatpacking plant or go to a hospital to work. And all those people in the front lines who have been so courageous and hardworking and have taken the brunt of COVID in many respects, they didn't have that choice. So I feel very lucky and privileged to be able to do it. But I didn't waste the time. I put it really to productive use.
Oh, that's fascinating. So do you think you'd try the two books simultaneously again, or do you think it only worked because they were in the two different time periods?
Yeah, part of me wants to try it again, and part of me is terrified that I can never pull it off again. So I don't know. I'm going to flip a coin on that one.
See. What do you most want readers to take away from your books after they've finished reading them?
I try to do two things in every book. I try to entertain, because my books are supposed to be entertainment, and I also try to inform. So things that I write about are subject matters that are important to me. And I tell aspiring writers, you can write about what you know about, and that's the old adage. But I said, here's something else to think about. Write about what you'd like to know about, and then you go about and you immerse yourself in that world and you get fascinated by it and the passion increases. And when that happens, it's like filling up your creative gas tank. Your prose will be better. Your characters will be more authentic. Your plots will be better if you're really interested in the subject matter. If you're not, and you run out of gas halfway through, and then you've written 200 pages, and you have no way to finish it, and you throw it away, and you get frustrated. That is not good. So for me, to write about things that I'm really interested in. So I try to let people know. I don't get on a soapbox and preach. I just, through the course of the story, normally lay out issues and topics that my own characters have to struggle with. It may be social issues, it may be political issues, it may be health issues. I've written about the opioid crisis, in Appalachia in a book. I've written certainly about politics in most of my books along the way, law enforcement, poverty, crime, social injustice. So I would like people to, I'm not trying to convince anybody one way or the other on any of these issues. I'm just trying to let them know that, hey, if you got a minute in everybody's busy life, you might want to learn more about this issue because I think it's important. And if you do, then come to your own opinion about it and then maybe talk to others about it because I think it's kind of important that we do.
We also have a lot of budding writers who tune into our online author events. Are you able to share the best piece of writing advice you've ever received?
Yeah, I really want to harp on this. One is that don't chase trends as a writer. I remember when Jurassic Park came out, every script and every book pitch had dinosaurs in it. And I remember even one agent telling me, for God's sakes, I just got a romantic comedy script and it had a T-Rex running right down the middle of the hallway in the apartment. How does that work? The problem with trends is, and it comes back to the passion, you're not writing it because you're interested in that stuff. You're writing it because Michael Crichton knocked it out of the park. He made a ton of money and he got movies made and you want that for you too, right? The problem is that they have Michael Crichton, so they don't need you. And the other problem is you don't care about dinosaurs, so you're going to run out of juice after chapter 3. So really you have got to, when you picked your subject matter and what you want to write about, make sure that you are so fascinated with this subject matter and the possibilities of the story that you could write this story for years and never run out of energy, because it might take you years to write the story, particularly if you have a full-time job. And a lot of unpublished authors, we had full-time jobs that you have to work through. And the other thing is, be aware that while you're writing and trying to build a career, a couple of things. One, never think and believe that you know everything that you're going to do from the get-go. Never believe that every word you've written is set in stone. And this goes to the editorial process. I know a lot of writers like, I don't want to listen to the editor. He just criticizes. The thing is, a good editor has the same goal that you have, is make the book as good as it possibly can be. And all I ask is that you have a relationship with an editor that's based on trust and honesty and respect. So you may not agree with the opinion, but you have to respect it. And I think if you do those things, make sure you have passion about the subject matter. Make sure that you understand that you may not know everything in the book. Let it be a journey and let it grow organically, and let epiphanies and revelations happen along the way. And even if you work from an outline, and I know a lot of writers that do are very successful, I don't really work from a detailed outline because I find it too constraining. It's okay if you deviate from something you wrote in an outline 3 months ago, and now you're right in the middle of the trenches of writing the story and something better occurs to you. It's okay to sort of change that and go in a different direction. The other thing, and maybe this is the one crucial piece of advice, writing is hard work. It takes discipline, vigilance. It can be frustrating as hell. You can write yourself into a corner. You can get writer's block and be really incredibly frustrated. Those are all normal things. It all happens. But at the same time, please, for the love of God, here's what you need to do. You need to make sure that while you're actually writing, have some fun with it. Make sure you're having fun while you're doing it. Because if you treat it as a drudge, the end product is going to read like a drudge. It's going to read like this is a 9-to-5 job and you're punching the clock just to get the words in so the book can get published and readers can read it and you can get your paycheck. It'll be an acceptable book, but it won't be a great book. So make sure that you have fun, because I guarantee you, if you are juiced about this story and you're having the time of your life while you're writing it, the readers will have the time of their lives while they're reading it.
Fantastic. I think that's great advice. You've obviously been writing during COVID and things like that. What books have you been reading lately as well?
I went back and I had read a number of Raymond Chandler's novels. I went back and read all the rest of them. And not only that, I read all of his short stories. And not only that, I read his correspondence, which is helpfully all in these multiple volumes. And he also wrote some really terrific essays on writing and how to put together really, great mysteries. And I've also been catching up on Ross Macdonald and his character, Lou Archer. He was sort of, the successor to Raymond Chandler. And he wrote about Hollywood in the late 40s, early 50s, and into the 60s. And the writing there is so atmospheric that it's just, for me, it's incredible. Chandler's prose was on par with any writer I've ever read, regardless of genre. Just the originality of the word selection, the vocabulary, the perspectives, the points of view that he has his characters take, and the dialogue is beyond crackling. It really is. So I've been catching up. I've been going back into the 40s, 50s, and 60s and catching up on some great, great stories.
Just interesting. So you're reading about some of how he wrote and things like that. Has that given you any ideas to try something different when the next book that you write, or just some confirmation on what you're doing is kind of what you need to do for you?
I think it's, every book you read can be a learning experience. It's something you can take away from it. I tell aspiring writers too, don't buy self-help books. If you want to buy a book, go buy a book by a writer in the genre you want to write in, who's had a long, successful career. And then you can learn from a master, who's actually done it. Go to the library and check it out if you want to, and learn from people who have actually done it and been very successful and had long careers. Because I'm not saying there's a formula or tricks or techniques or whatever. I'm just saying that writing is a craft. And we are all apprentices for life. None of us will ever master this craft. But every book that you pick up and read, you can learn from. Because you can see how, and I did the same thing. I read lots of different types of writers across the spectrum of genres. And even though I ended up being a mystery thriller writer, I've written other books outside of that genre. But I've learned something about the techniques in every book that I've ever read. Because if you break it down like, game film for sports, and to see how to, instead of, you can read it once through for pleasure and just have a great time. And then go back through and read it again and ask yourself, why was this book so good? And you could break it down to how did the writer develop the character the way that he or she did over the course of a number of pages, and what really intrigued me about that character. Break it down to idiosyncrasies, to personality, to physical characteristics, to dialogue, and then go back and see how the plot developed. Was it one main plot throughout? Were there subplots streaming off of that? Were there subplots going off of that? What was the degree of quality of the peripheral characters in the novel? The third and fourth levels out there. What did they add to it, and how were they introduced, and how did they exit out of the story as well? When you break it down like that, things start to become readily apparent. about the thought process that went into building these types of books that you so much enjoyed. You in turn then can take some of those same things and at least put it into your thought process when you're building your stories out. And I know that it works because it certainly worked for me and other writers that I've talked to who have been very successful as well. You'll never find a writer, I think, that is not also a voracious reader. They almost go hand in hand. I've never met a writer who said, "Oh yeah, I've never picked up another book in my life." It's just not happening. They go hand in hand.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So this is a point where we're going to throw open to the viewer questions. So if you've got a, please put them in the comments and we'll put them up on screen for David. Here's our first question from Helena. Is Atlee Pine based on anyone and who inspired you to create her?
That's a great question. I tell people just a little bit tongue in cheek that I'm actually married to Atlee Pine. My wife is not a federal law enforcement agent, but by God, she could be one if she wanted to. She is, I write about strong, independent women because I was surrounded by them my whole life. Both my grandmothers who lived with us. My mom was a force of nature. I sleep with the force of nature, and we raised a force of nature, and our oldest is our daughter. So I've observed that all my life, and I feel very comfortable writing from the female perspective. So I think that Atlee Pine is really based on a number of women that I have met in my life, several of them family members, and several of them just people that I have known a long time. Again, what I wanted to show was that, women can do anything. And, I'm humbled enough to know that men are the weaker sex. We just are. It just, there's no doubt about it in my mind. And I like writing about the female from the female perspective because I think that I've observed it for most of my life. And so Atlee Pine really is just little bits and pieces of a lot of different women that I've met in my life, and several of them who are still in my life. And I wanted to make it authentic. And I thought the best way to make it authentic was just take the character and build her from lots of people who I know are real people, who are authentic in my mind. And that way I could build a really authentic character.
Excellent. Thanks, Helena. That was a great question.
Yes.
Now we've got a question from Joshua. Mr. Baldacci, thank you for your iconic epic work that has influenced my first novel, which I'm now writing. How did you navigate the unknown while writing Absolute Power, and how was it writing while practicing law at the same time?
That's a great question. When I knew that writing a novel was going to take a long time. So I didn't give myself any deadline. It wasn't like anybody was waiting. When is David going to finish his first novel? Who the hell cared? Nobody knew who I was. So I knew that I had time. And what I would do, I would write on it for a little bit, and then life would take over. I would have to go out of town and litigate cases, and I would be absorbed in my work and family life as well. But I would always come back to it. And I would come back to it with exuberance because even though I'd been off doing other things, I was always thinking about the book. It was kind of my baby. This is the thing I was creating. So it was always in my mind. Every waking moment, part of my brain, it could have been my subconscious, was still thinking about it. And I think that's the way you have to sort of approach it. You don't want to start writing something and abandon it totally for 6 or 7 months because it's really hard to get back to it. And even though life does take over, just spending a few minutes thinking about it each day, even if you don't write a word about it, is really important to sort of keep that connectivity going so you don't lose focus on what you're trying to do. And I would go out, and while I was writing the book, I was researching different things because as you're writing, different topics come up and you're like, oh, I need to know more about that. And that it helps continue the writing flow, but it also helps you to remain focused and fascinated by what you're writing about. Because I always get kind of juiced when I have to go out and find out about something new, talk to somebody or read a book or go someplace, which is always kind of cool. Now, when the book was finished, and I tell people this, you have to be as creative in finding an agent as you are in creative in writing the book. So when the book was finished, I knew I needed an agent. Back then, there was no platforms for self-publishing. There was no Amazon or anything like that. So what I would do, I would go, whenever I read about a first-time novelist who had hit it big, and their agent got them in and all that. So I would go down to that bookstore. I'd open that book. I'd look in the acknowledgments. They always thank their agent in the acknowledgments. Either they thank the agent in the acknowledgement or the book is dedicated to the agent. So I did that like 6 or 7 times. And that's the way I get names of 6 or 7 agents because they were all in there. And that told me a couple of things about the agents. One, they accept first-time novelists. Not all agents do. Some only accept already established writers. And two, it told me that that agent had sort of the wherewithal to guide a first-time novelist through the gauntlet of publishing. So when my novel was ready to go, I printed out 7 copies of the manuscript. I had a very short query letter. And the way I drafted the query letter, I put a lot of thought into. It was very short. They don't want to read the query letter. They want to read the manuscript. So here I said, "Dear so-and-so, my name is David Baldacci. I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C. This story is about the president, a burglar, and a cover-up. And I guarantee if you read the first page, you won't stop until you read the last page." And I did that for a very specific reason. First of all, I thought, if I didn't have confidence in my own material, why should I expect them to? But secondly, more importantly, I figured half of them at least would read it just to prove me wrong. So they could write back to me and say, "You're wrong, you suck." So that's how I approached that. And luckily for me, you know, every agent wrote back, except for one, and said, "We want to be your agent." So I got up to go to New York and interviewed them. And I picked the agent who's still my agent today, one of my best friends in the world. And I remember a number of years ago, the agent who turned me down came over to me at some publishing event. And he said, "I just want you to know that was the biggest, stupidest mistake I've ever made in my whole life." And I said, "No, it wasn't. It's a very subjective business. Don't feel bad about it." Well, feel a little bit bad about it, but not a whole lot bad about it.
That's fantastic. That's such a brilliant idea. Now I've got a question from Marissa. Are you working on any new characters?
Right now, I'm sort of focused on my 3 A's, Amos and Atlee and Aloysius. Aloysius, for me, Aloysius Archer from One Good Deed is still very much a new character. I've only written 2 books about him now, only one of which has been published. The next one is called A Gambling Man, and it'll be out in April of next year. So he really is fresh for me right now, and I'm very excited about tackling a 3rd book with him. Now, some of my other series characters, you know, they may be reaching the end of their useful life, and I may want to move on. And I would think probably in the next year or two that I'm going to be thinking about a new series character that I may, you know, try to put together and then start writing about in a number of books too. So I think I kind of feel and sense that I'm getting to that point.
Excellent. And I've got another question from Helena. Will you be including the pandemic in your future books? Do you think there will be a new trend of books based on the pandemic?
I am sure that there will be a new trend of books based on the pandemic. I will not be involved in that because, you know, I have no interest in writing about the pandemic. It's just, it has engulfed our lives to such a degree. And people, you know, turn to my sort of books for escapism in many ways. So I think the last thing they want to read is open up a book and it says, "And anyway, the virus had already killed," you know, no, not happening. I'm sorry. I'll go read Dr. Seuss or something. But so I'm sure there are going to be a lot of pandemic books. I mean, you know, some of the most famous books out there, you know, Virus and Coma and things like that by Robert Cook and others have been great reads. But I don't think I'm going to be contributing to that genre.
Do you think it'll have any influence, though, on some of your stories? Because obviously it's impacted on all our lives, so it's going to impact on some of your characters too.
Yeah, you know, and I think I've come to that point where, because in the books that I've finished and are coming out now, I haven't mentioned the virus. Nobody's wearing a face mask. Nobody's social distancing. I've just kind of ignored it at this point because when I was writing those books, I had no idea how long is this thing going to last. It was sort of amorphous, and nobody really knew. So I could have said, well, let me just try to deal with it, or I could ignore it. And my choice was to ignore it. And I think I did that just because it had overwhelmed so much of everyone's lives already. When I went into my little, you know, room to write, I wanted to escape from it too. I didn't want to have to deal with COVID. I didn't want to have to write the word COVID anywhere in anything that I was writing. So my choice was kind of to ignore it.
And I've got a question from Sue. Writing 2 books at once sounds intense. How much plotting do you do, or do you just let the story unfold?
Those are great questions. I just did an event with John Grisham a couple of weeks ago in London via Zoom. And John and I have done a number of events together, and we always have this battle. John is the outliner. He outlines everything from A to Z, and he knows the ending because he doesn't want to get written into a corner and lose his train of thought and all that. And I'm kind of the opposite of that. I don't outline pretty much anything. I've never known the ending of a book before I sit down to write it. I let it grow organically. I have little ideas. I have journals where I keep many outlines. Here's a chapter. I want this to occur in this chapter. Sometimes I have broad oversweeps of where I think the movements might be going, but those also tend to change. I used to try the big whiteboard, and you have the flow charts and all that stuff over there. When I was in law school, I did that same thing with the Uniform and Commercial Code. There are 9 articles in the Uniform and Commercial Code. And this was before computers or anything. So I diagrammed in a flow chart all the articles of the Uniform and Commercial Code on pieces of Xerox paper taped together, and I rolled them up. And everybody in law school, I went to the University of Virginia Law School, I would unroll this in the library. It was like 50 feet long, and it told you how all the articles of the UCC worked together. It was really kind of a cool thing. I wish I still had it. Who the hell knows where it is now? And it worked beautifully. And I aced that course that year, and everybody came into the library to look at my flow charts. With that said, when I did it on a whiteboard, okay, here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen. And as I'm writing the book, none of that was in the book. I mean, none of it ended up being in the book because I came up with better ideas, better thoughts, a better flow, better outcomes than I had initially thought of. And that's why, for me, I think my best ideas, revelations, epiphanies, whatever you want to call them, comes from when I'm in the trenches working on the book, not outlining it before I've written the very first page. If I'm in the novel and I'm in the middle of everything, it's kind of like my synapses are firing. More precisely, my mind is a computer. I'm going 1,000 miles an hour. I'm looking at hundreds of different options, and they all are very clear in my mind. All the choices that I have, where I can go, and I literally, I work through all of them really fast, and then I pick the one that I know absolutely fits that moment in the novel because I'm totally immersed in that world. And that's just the way I work. I'm not saying outlines are bad. They work for writers. John obviously been hugely successful, and that works for him. But the important point is for writers out there is there's no set method. There's no set procedure or protocol. You can build your own. You can be a hybrid outliner and a hybrid, let it grow organically, full outline, no outline. And guess what? As you write more and more books, you may change your method of how you do it. You may do more outlining or less outlining. The great thing is you just have to find the procedure at that moment in time, at that moment in your career that works best for you. And you're allowed to do that.
Has any of your books taken you by surprise where they've ended up?
Oh my God, absolutely. Some endings, particularly, when I think about when I started the book and then when I ended it, I was like, I had no idea this is where this was going to go. And which is a good thing, because I feel like I'm writing the book and I thought of everything in the book. If I surprise myself, I'm going to knock the readers on their ass. I mean, I just am, because they didn't have the benefit of me knowing all of this stuff. They're going to be like, oh my God, where did that come from? So that's not a bad thing at all. And that's another thing that surprise and delight and having fun. That's why it's so important. You finish a book and you're like, Jesus, where did that come from? That was just so cool. And guess what? That's a very positive mental thing to have occur to you. And what does that do? That motivates you for the next one. I'm rolling, man. I can't wait to get on to the next one. Instead of saying, geez, I'm glad that's over. I'm going to take 6 months off. I've never felt that way after I've finished a book, that, geez, I'm glad that's over. I've always felt like I can't wait to do this again.
I've got a question from Marissa. You mentioned Australia in some of your novels. Would you ever set any of your stories here?
Yeah, it's a fascinating place, and a lot of different possibilities too. And I never say never about locations and where I might set novels or not. If it works into the plot that I'm trying to build, if it works into the background of a character, if it's logical for them to go to Australia, be from Australia, have some connection there, I'm all game for that. And I never limit myself. There's only one place I've never that I've written about that I haven't gone, and that was a book I wrote called The Target. It was a Roby series, and a lot of the book was set in North Korea. And my wife said, "You're not going to North Korea," and I said to myself, "I'm not going to North Korea." So I didn't go to North Korea. But everything else is pretty much, it's an option.
Fantastic. All right, have we got another question out there for David? From Tim, for readers who are yet to read one of your books, where would you suggest they start?
Great question. I'll give you two possibilities. One is a standalone book, so it's not a series. You don't have to worry about reading multiple books. It's called The Winner. It was my third novel, and in that novel, I have a heroine, Lou Ann Tyler, who is dirt poor from Appalachia. And there's a guy named Jackson, and he's sort of the villain in the story. And Jackson has figured out how to fix the United States National Lottery and do it in a way that is scientifically based so he can pick the winner of the lottery. And he goes around to people like Lou Ann Tyler who are very poor and sort of gives them a Faustian bargain. You're poor, I can make you rich. It's not legal, but all you have to do is play. No one will ever know the truth except you and me. Will you do it or not? So that's the winner, and it's just a really, really fun read with a lot of cool elements to it. Series, I would suggest that you start with Memory Man, and The Memory Man is the first novel in the Amos Decker series, and he's a really compelling, intriguing character, a character you probably have never read about in any other novel, just because he's so original. At least I think he is. And Memory Man is just, I poured everything I could think of into that novel in creating this brand new character. And I think you'll enjoy that novel a lot.
Fantastic. All right, last question for David. Here we go from Katie. I'd love to hear you read from the opening chapter of the new book.
Well, let's see. It's right here, so I'll read a quick excerpt from it. The opening chapter is really important. And I like to start off with memorable lines if I can. So the first line in this book is, "Now is the moment of reckoning." FBI agent, Special Agent Adley Pine was sitting in a rental car outside of Andersonville, Georgia, with her assistant, Carol Blum, next to her. She hit the name on her contact list and listened to the phone ringing. Dialogue. "Pine, how nice of you to call," the dripping with sarcasm voice said into her ear. "The man speaking was the FBI's top dog in Arizona, Clint Dobbs. He was the one who had given Pine permission to take a sabbatical in order to find out what happened to her twin sister Mercy, who had been abducted from their home in Andersonville 30 years before. 6-year-old Pine had nearly died in the process. I'm sorry, sir, it's just been a little busy. I understand that you have been extremely busy. You solved a series of murders down there, prevented other killings, nearly got blown up in the process, and discovered something truly remarkable about your past. Hell, the Bureau might owe you a bonus. I take it you've been kept informed through other channels. You could say that, yes, since you have been remarkably uncommunicative. Would that source of information be Eddie Laredo? Laredo was an FBI special agent who'd been sent down to Georgia to help in a murder investigation. He and Pine had a history, a complicated one, but she believed they had resolved things."
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, David. Now, if that's whet anyone's appetite out there to read Daylight, you can grab it from your local Dymocks or jump onto the Dymocks website and order your copy there. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in for this interview today. David, thank you for joining us all the way from America. I know it's well, not too late at night. It is the evening over there, whereas we're in the middle of our lunchtime. But thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to your new book. And it's great to know that each book of yours that comes out, you have so much fun writing it so that we can have so much fun reading them as well. So thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone out there for tuning in.
Thank you. It was great. I enjoyed it very much.